It's really good to be home. Probably for the Packers this week, too. What's up, everybody? Welcome to a home episode of Lombardi Time Brews. Not on the road today, actually back home at the piano desk, ready to just cover the Green Bay Packers. Coming off of preseason game 2, a game that if you watched any of it, I hope you're having a blessed day today to make up for whatever watching that was late into the night last night. It wasn't exactly ideal, right? If you didn't watch the game, no one really blames you. It was week 2 of the preseason, generally one of the most lackluster weeks for a number of different reasons. And the Packers, at least with the word lackluster, did not disappoint. It was ugly. The Packers did play terribly. Of course, with 31 people out. And we're going to get to that in just a second. But today, I wanted to give you my 10 thoughts. One just in general, 8 positions, and then one for somebody else. 10 thoughts about game 2 of the preseason. And then upcoming for the rest of the week. Tuesday, we got practice tomorrow, the last regular open to the public practice. And then Thursday, the joint practice for the Packers and Ravens. Very excited for the rest of this week. I will be doing the typical post-practice lives from a parking lot or Titletown, or wherever I can find a quiet space for the rest of the week. And then also coming up soon will be another 53-man roster prediction, all before we get to next Tuesday's Cut Down Day. 2 more quick announcements. Next Tuesday, Cut Down Day, joint show with Wisco Fanatics. Very, very excited about that. We're going to go live at the deadline, covering all of the moves to get the Packers down to 53. Then, in addition, don't forget, for those of you out there who love our watch parties, yeah, this weekend is the return of him. We're going to go live, Claudia and I, for the first half of Packers versus Ravens. Yeah, just the first half. Then we got stuff to do. It's the preseason. Come on. So we're going to do it for the first half. Work out the kinks on the watch party for this year and say hi to all of you folks out there. So, all right, let's do it. 10 things that I thought about week 2. Number 1, that sucked. Really did. Packers lost to the Broncos in embarrassingly bad fashion. And as I mentioned in the opener, 31 players did not play for the Green Bay Packers. Basically, every starter who's not a special teamer, plus some of the key backups. That's, just kind of a lot of talent off the field. And for the Broncos, for their credit, they did not rest a lot of their starters. Patrick Surtain was out there covering good old Malik Heath and everyone like that. So there was some real talent imbalances here. And I don't want to get into excuse making. I don't want it to sound that way. Okay. But the reality is, it's preseason and it was backups against starters. The Packers notoriously for years do not scheme for the preseason. They walk in and say, these are the plays we're going to do, and here they are. And they don't really do that much to fight against whatever the opposite team is doing. Now, for the Denver Broncos, they're in a completely different situation. Second-year head coach, they're just looking to stack wins, looking to build some momentum. The Packers are just looking to get through this and get to the regular season when the real work for them begins. Now, with that being said, the starter versus backup excuse, rationale, if you will, obviously only lasts so far into the game. And the Packers played like crap for the entirety of the game. Granted, a little bit better in the second half than the first half, but still, they didn't exactly play great in the second half. So even when it got to be future bartenders versus future grocery store workers, Packers still played bad. And that's obviously not great. And then beyond that, too, some of those things just still remain true, right? No matter who you're against, you got to tackle. Well, some Packers really struggled with that. So what the coaching staff, what the front office can take from this game, because generally in preseason, they're not super worried about the scoreboard anyway. They're much more worried about looking at what worked versus what didn't. And in a game like this, especially when it was rain in the beginning, different guys who aren't used to playing with these teammates, whatever, they're really going to be looking a lot for individual performances. Scrutinize the individuals. Did this tackle handle a bull rusher well? Did they tackle well? Did they make the lone field goal attempt that they had? Things like that, right? So even in a complete dud of a game where the team did not exactly come out fired up. It looked like they really enjoyed Topgolf the day before. They didn't seem too interested in playing a game this week, which is a real shame for some of those guys who are on the bottom of the roster who had to play well in order to secure a roster spot or make the roster at all. Keep in mind, realistically, of the 53, probably a good 40, maybe 42 of them are pretty well secure. There's like 20 guys fighting for 10 spots. And these are the guys that, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of whether you want to do it or not, regardless of the scheme, whatever, they got to do their individual stuff well. And that is exactly what the front office and the coaching staff is going to be actively looking for. Did they do it well or not? So even a complete dud of a game like this can still serve its purpose. Right? And I will agree, as I said already, that sentiment that I saw out there about the Broncos being a completely different team. Obviously, both teams are very young, with the Broncos being on the bad side of young, the Packers being considered a contender while being very young, right? So they're in different places. For the Broncos, it was important to play well. For the Packers, it was important to just get out alive. And, well, resting 31 of your best players is a really good way to ensure that none of them are going to get hurt. It's also a really good way to ensure that you're probably not putting your best product on the field. And they didn't. And they didn't play well either. Both things can be true. There can be all of these excuses, all of these reasons, all of these rationales that are very true, while also simultaneously being true that they just flat out played like crap, and they did. And that's where I'm at with this. So you know what? Look at the individual performances, burn the rest, and move the freak on to Baltimore. As far as I'm concerned, play the starters in quarter one against Baltimore. Because to this point, most of the first-string offense has played 3 snaps in the preseason. 3. This is not 37-year-old Aaron Rodgers chucking it out there to Lazard, who's been doing it for years, Cobb, who's been doing it for too many years, etc. This is still a young quarterback with very young wide receivers, overall a young offensive line. They still got to do something in the preseason, right? And thus far, they've played 3 plays. So get out there next week, play some real competition with the Baltimore Ravens, try to get yourself some momentum and some practice on the way into the regular season for what is truly a massive, huge momentum-shifting game in Week 1. And that's not to oversell Week 1. That's the reality of it. It's a huge game for Week 1. So as far as I'm concerned, if I'm LaFleur, I'm going to play them for about a quarter, get them some good practice against another contending team, a preseason game that even they can fire up for, and really get them ready. The Packers are still young. They still need practice. Do the thing. All right, so here's 9 more things. A lot of these are much more position specific. Number 2, let's go to the running backs. A.J. Dillon didn't dress. He did not play. They sat him. He was one of the 31. Okay, and I know that after preseason game 1, there was a lot of frustration with A.J. Dillon, specifically all of those attempts to get 1 yards that he didn't get any yards on, all those reps in a row, right? I understand the frustration, a lot of very loud frustration, where even A.J. Dillon talked about it at his locker. But the reality is, if they're sitting him for this game, well, along with all of the other starters, A.J. Dillon is making this roster. We can put to bed all the talk of maybe he's going to get cut. No. If he were on the bubble at all, he would have been playing, fighting, vying for his spot. They told him he didn't have to. Seems rather indicative of a guy who's got a job. And I've been saying it for a long time, so I'll continue to say it. He is the best running back on this team at pass protection. Josh Jacobs is not better than him. Marshawn Lloyd, very, very much a work in progress in that regard. And Emmanuel Wilson, while making progress, still not great at it. A.J. Dillon is by far the best in the team on pass pro. He knows the offense better than anyone outside of probably just Jordan Love. He's a locker room leader, and now he's a special teams contributor, getting snaps every so often as the kickoff protector. All of that leads up to being running back 3, taking on a number of niche stuff. With Lloyd's injury, he has been running back 2 throughout all of camp. So he's not on the bubble. However, with Emmanuel Wilson, I gotta wonder, because keep in mind, there's an interesting rules change this year. There are 2 players that the Packers can declare that can go on IR. And keep in mind, IR can now just be 4 weeks. So there are 2 guys on cutdown day that the Packers can put on IR that do not have to occupy spots in the 53. Historically, we've seen all of this gamesmanship, all this stupid crap that I've hated, honestly, where if you're going to put a guy on IR, they got to count on your initial 53, and then the next day you can make all these moves and finalize your 53. It's stupid. It's done. I'm glad that the NFL got rid of it. Now you can put a guy on IR and still declare somebody else for your 53. And I got to wonder if Marshawn Lloyd is not healthy next week, Tuesday, given just how much of camp he's missed, like all of it. Is that their vehicle to get Emmanuel Wilson onto the initial 53 to make sure that no one else can touch him? Makes a lot of sense to me. And then Marshawn Lloyd can take the first month of the season and truly heal up. Emmanuel Wilson can then get waived when Lloyd is back and returned in week 4 or 5 when teams are not shopping the waiver wire nearly as extensively for depth running backs. It's at least something to consider. I think it very well might be likely. And side note on Emmanuel Wilson. I know he's improved somewhat in pass pro, as I mentioned, and I know he is a very dynamic runner who can get you some good yardage, no doubt. But oftentimes, just like against Denver, so often when we saw him in the regular season last year, there was like this occasional difficult run where he did something really good, but then there were 8 other carries that went for a grand total of a yard. And sometimes they were the offensive line's fault. Sometimes they were his fault for not cutting it back inside, trying to bounce outside, etc. Kind of a lot like A.J. Dillon. Like a lot. When he goes against starters, that's what we see from Emmanuel Wilson and A.J. Dillon. And that's exactly what we've seen. I've called him the second most consistent back in camp all throughout the whole time. And I really do believe that Emmanuel Wilson. But when he goes against ones, this is what we see. And so I've seen some talk about like, should he upend Lloyd for running back 2? He certainly should be on the team over Dillon. I don't know. I just can't get with that yet. I just don't see the dynamicness enough from Wilson. It's not a knock on him. I think it's just his current reality. But you want to keep him around as like the Patrick Taylor-esque like running back 4 who bounces between practice squad and roster and is always around? That I can absolutely get with. Number 3, let's talk O-line. Andre Dillard is very likely safe. He barely played last night. I think it was just one series that he was in. He held up really, really well at left tackle. He's definitely the leader for the backup tackle spot. And I don't want to call it a true swing tackle because Dillard's only good on one side. He's good on the left tackle side. He's not so good on the right side. And that was his reputation in Philadelphia. That was his reputation last year in Tennessee when he sucked at pass pro. I think it's just, again, like the reality for Andre Dillard. He can do the left side. The man cannot do the right. And yet he seems to be very much in the lead for this backup tackle spot that the Packers have to offer. So I have to wonder if Andre Dillard is safe. Let's say Rasheed Walker goes down. Okay, well, that one's easy. Just put Dillard in. If Zach Tom goes down, do they kick Walker to right tackle? Maybe even Elton Jenkins out? And then put Dillard or Sean Ryan in? Leave Dillard on the left side no matter what? That might be their plan. Because right now, no true swing tackle is really presenting themselves as a viable option, minus maybe Kadeem Telfort, who's kind of a big question to even make the 53 if Dillard is safe. Because let's evaluate the offensive line room. You got Walker, Jenkins, Myers, Morgan, Tom. Those are your 5 starters, assuming Jordan Morgan's health, right? They're your 5 starters. Locks, guaranteed. Sean Ryan, OL6, he's guaranteed. Dillard, OL7, probably safe. And then Monk, who has played way better in games, last night included. Like, give him the gamer tag, not Sean Clifford. Way better in games than practice. He's realistically your offensive lineman 8. So now, realistically, from a roster construction standpoint, you got your 5 starters, you got a couple of guards on your starting line who can capably play tackle, but then in your backups, you got Sean Ryan, who's interior, you got Dillard, who's a tackle, and you got Monk, who's interior. And they generally keep 10 offensive linemen. We're already up to 8. So is this maybe a year, though, that they go with 9 offensive linemen? Because it's not like the 10th one is ever really active anyway. And maybe they got to keep another linebacker in Welch, who I'm going to talk about in a second. Maybe they got to keep 4 tight ends, right? There are options plentifully across this roster this year to not keep 10 offensive linemen and just go with 9, just with the understanding that that is a break from Gutekunst's roster construction post-COVID. He almost always keeps 10. But maybe they do keep 9. And if it's only 9, we've already got 8. Do you keep Glover as the draft pick, the developmental tackle? Because I got to tell you, all the tools are there from Glover, but there's a reason he hasn't really played with the twos yet. And last night was a pretty good showing of that. Dude can get beat a lot. Or do they keep Newman, another interior guy, just because of his experience, even though he basically played the whole game last night and didn't exactly have fantastic results? Do they keep Telfort, who's played way above expectation for a former UDFA? He's shown some really good stuff on both the left side and the right side. Maybe he's more ready to play than a lot of others right now. Or do they keep two of them? Right now, it very much, if you're wondering about Caleb Jones, it feels like he's the odd man out and on the outside looking in to not even truly be a part of this conversation right now. We'll have to see what direction they go. Number 4, quarterbacks. Sean Clifford repeatedly in this game made me pull out my true Midwestern mom and go, ooh, duh. Sean, what you doing, buddy? That interception that Sean Clifford threw was bad throw, bad decision, bad process. It was just straight up bad all the way around. He also scrambled his way into a sack because he should have just gotten rid of the ball. And if you're wondering what the Sean Clifford experience has been like at training camp, he had 2 really nice deep balls to Bo Melton and Malik Heath. Those were both good throws. Decisions maybe weren't perfect, but they were both good throws. But then everything else, what's this? Ooh, a really nice scramble. Maybe he should have gotten rid of it, but he made something happen, a really nice scramble. Ooh, a fumbled snap, where then he gained a couple yards on the scramble. But again, it started with a bad snap. Oh, boy. Oh, there when he scrambled himself into a sack. Oh, that was a real bad decision. That wasn't a good throw at all. Oh. Remember last year when we were calling Sean Clifford the baby Brett, right? The gunslinger? The guy who was just out there having fun and just slinging it to all these new wide receivers? Yeah, see, this is the bad side of that. The gamer tag that John Kuhn kept on talking about on the telecast. Because when it goes bad, it goes real bad. And thus far in training camp, what we've seen is a lot more of the bad than the good from Sean Clifford. And so we hit this point in last night's game where it was like, oh, okay, well, Sean Clifford, like he's going out. This is Pratt's chance. Like if Michael Pratt is going to take hold of the number 2 job, it's tonight because Clifford looks like garbage. Pratt can come in. If he lights it up, look out. This could be Michael Pratt's time. And then he didn't. He just really didn't last night. He looked the same as he's looked in practice every day. Ultimately, the ball moved fairly well, but pretty slow process. His actual arm motion, pretty slow. Just not fully taking control. So I've seen it all. Like I've seen all the knee-jerk reactions about how the Packers have to go sign a different number 2. They gotta. What's Seneca Wallace doing these days? What's going on with Ryan Tannehill? Like I've seen all that, and I can't get with it. Kicker? Yeah, maybe they call somebody outside. I'm talk about it in a second. OL help? Maybe, although I don't really think so anymore. The time for that probably has passed. Quarterback? I don't think so. I believe the Gutekunst has talked about wanting to get back to developing quarterbacks, drafting quarterbacks, developing quarterbacks every year. Get a new one in there, learn, teach them. Tough to do that when you give up on them after a year or the year they're drafted. I think Clifford and Pratt may be it. And let's be frank. Yeah, if Jordan Love misses a couple games, you want your backup to come in and at least function the offense. Maybe that's when they would call Tannehill if he's still unemployed. But if Jordan Love goes down for a good stretch of the season, that goose is cooked anyway. So, that is what it is. And I will say too, perhaps the largest detriment to awful quarterback play last night, we didn't get to see the freaking kickers very much. And that brings us to number 5, kicking. A heated kicker competition, and you get 1 field goal attempt. 1 field goal attempt. These dudes have had like 60 field goal attempts in camp all the way through. And then you get into a game situation and you get them 1? Like Brian Gutekunst is going to evaluate anything off of that? Like in order to evaluate them, they got a kick. And they got 1 attempt. It was Greg Joseph from 47 yards. And what did he do with it? Of course he freaking missed it. Of course. LaFleur may actually have to scheme for game 3 just to make sure that the kickers get opportunities so that they can be evaluated in a game setting, in an actual stadium, not Ray Nitschke practice field. Right now, I find myself just waffling every day between these 2 kickers. And I still gotta believe, just logically speaking, if this competition is even close, that it's going to go to Anders Carlson. Think of age, contract status, draft status, etc., the relationship with Bisaccia, the whole deal, right? If it's even close, it probably goes to Carlson. And Joseph has had his chance over the last week to really pull away. And he hasn't. I've detailed extensively, day in and day out, how, it probably does go to Carlson if it's even close, but the way he's kicking right now really bothers me. It just doesn't look comfortable. He's short kicking everything. Nothing has any drive to it like it did last year for Anders. He's kicking differently, and I feel like I'm the only one screaming this. Everyone else is just like, he sucks. Yeah, there's a reason. And I think this year it's because he's kicking differently. It's not working as well as it should. Meanwhile, Joseph is just ripping it, but he's had the accuracy issues that he's had throughout his entire freaking career, both in Minnesota and Cleveland. He's performing to career expectation thus far. We shouldn't have expected much more. But man, gotta wonder, is it Joey Sly? Is it Cade York? Is it one of these guys that's embroiled in some kind of kicking competition on another team right now that winds up being the Packers kicker? Maybe. Because, woof, I don't know what to do with these two anymore. Number 6, linebackers. Teron Hopper, look at that dude. When he was first drafted, I thought, okay, like here's a guy who can run and chase. He's got some good speed. If he learns to tackle, that would be ideal. But maybe they'll have a package for him as a coverage guy because he can't tackle. He really didn't do well with it collegiately, but maybe like give him a coverage role, have him included in dime as the linebacker, whatever, right? And that's kind of how he profiled best at draft time, in my opinion. And then last night, surrounded by all these injuries in the linebacker, plus Walker not playing, etc., 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 all of a sudden, Hopper has got the green dot on his helmet. He's making all of the calls for the defense, and he's good old Blake Martinez out there. All of a sudden, like I don't want to say a perfect tackler, but a relatively secure tackler who racks up the tackles, led the team in tackling, making all the calls. And like, yeah, there was some bad out there. He took some bad angles. Coverage wasn't great, which we kind of expected, right? But this was still a really strong performance for him. Let's not forget that the green dot for a rookie at all is a really large responsibility, and he seemingly did pretty well, at least with that. So he still probably is a ways away from being a real contributor. Maybe just specialty packages like we were kind of guessing at draft time. But this was still a nice performance for him. He wasn't drafted to contribute this year, besides maybe special teams. That's kind of the way it's shaping up. Because even with health, he still should be linebacker 5? Cooper, Wilson, McDuffie, Walker, Happa. So think of it that way. And then I will say, too, another really strong performance from Christian Welch. Certainly a core special teamer if he makes the roster, but he did some really nice stuff defensively last night, including shedding blocks, in coverage, etc. Remember back when Hafley was hired, Gutekunst said that the scheme change may dictate that the Packers need to keep more linebackers than they normally have done. They normally keep 5. If they're going to keep more, my math tells me 6, in which case, Christian Welch, you're up. But, kind of like offensive line, if you're going to keep a 6th linebacker, what else goes? Also important to note, Rich Bisaccia is continuing to use more safeties on special teams than he ever has before. And I think with the kickoff changes, that can be expected to stay. So that then would diminish the importance of Welch, maybe? I don't know. Things to consider. And then also Eric Wilson, he's safe. If there was any doubt in your mind, remove it, because he's definitely safe. Very strong camp. He's good. Number 7, D-line. Ford. Jonathan Ford. Mick, if you're watching, this is your buddy. Jonathan Ford continues to look improved. I just don't see them keeping 6 defensive tackles. And I will say, too, another note about the D-line, good for Kobe Wooden. No, the dude has not made the most highlight plays in camp, but last night, he did. He got himself a highlight. Speaking of highlights, good for Zach Morton. The dude just picked up last week. What a sack on that safety. I don't know who had Zach Morton putting up the first points of the game in the preseason, but whoever did, if they got them on the bingo card, I hope that they are living a very lucrative life today. Last note on the D-line. I think Zach Cruz from Packers Wire, he probably said it best. We all have assumed that Brenton Cox Jr. was D-end 5 if they keep one. But Mosby is at least creating a conversation. I agree. Cox really did do some nice things last night, and he's got 8 pressures through 2 weeks. It's tied for the lead in the NFL for guys who have played in both games. And so he didn't really do anything to hurt his cause. But he doesn't play special teams, and Mosby has had a good amount of energy and pop when rushing the passer. So while it probably is still Cox in the lead for DN 5, if they keep 5, which I think they will, Mosby is at least, he's worth some thought. Maybe not the shoe-in we all thought. Number 8, wide receivers. Malik Heath showing that he does not want to be forgotten. You can take all your Grant Dubose highlights and don't you forget about me. Basically what he said last night. Dubose showing that he's more than willing to do some of the war daddy traits a la Al Lazard or last year, Malik Heath. Keep in mind that Heath is still probably the superior run blocker, even though Dubose did some really nice things in that regard. And Heath was the only receiver on the team last year to play more run snaps than passing snaps. They love him in that role. Still, though, probably comes down to keeping 6 wide receivers. You have 4 guarantees, Melton near a guarantee. So then wide receiver 6 is going to go to Heath or DuBose. I don't think there's anyone else even in the conversation, in spite of relatively strong caps from Dimitri Stanley, who, yeah, I'm off the pup last night. But then you also have Julian Hicks, who's had a good camp. Jalen Wayne has made some nice plays. I don't think any of them are realistically in the conversation. It comes down to DuBose or Heath. And which one is going to make the team versus which one is on the practice squad? Probably comes down to which one they think can safely get to the practice squad. And that's probably going to be the sole determiner. Now, number 9, corners. Kalen King, buddy, I'm pulling for you, but dude, you've got to learn the tackle. Last night, watching that game, I was actively thinking, if there's anyone on the roster who probably has benefited more from not having live tackling in practice, it's probably Kalen King. Like, he's got to have benefited the most. Because in practice, day in and day out, he can just focus on his coverage. He just has to get his body in there and mix it up. He doesn't actually have to bring down Josh Jacobs or A.J. Dillon or Emmanuel Wilson or Lloyd if he's been there. He doesn't have to do that in practice. All of a sudden, in a game situation, he does. And we saw the deficiencies in tackling last night. I know he's a smaller corner by a lot of standards. He's not that far from average, but especially for the Packers like him, he is on the small side. I know that he's had some issues tackling in college, but last night was a rough night for the 7th rounder. Every day in camp, he's shown to be incredibly sticky in coverage, a playmaker, certainly a worthwhile slot project. But especially in Jeff Hafley's defense, if you're going to play the slot, that means you're also playing the run. And from the tackling last night, we saw Kalen King has to improve in that area. Also noteworthy for the secondary last night, the Packers started Anthony Johnson Jr. and Evan Williams at safety with Javon Bullard in the slot. See, I got to think, if Nixon has to miss time or miss snaps because of his return duties, whatever, and they need someone to go in the slot, I got this real feeling that Javon Bullard, in addition to being safety 1 next to McKinney, is probably slot 2. And then they would put in Evan Williams, which, again, just kind of shows Kalen King relatively far down the depth chart. Do they keep a slot 2 on the 53 when they've got safeties who can play slot and the safety depth looks better than the cornerback depth? I'm not saying that they should cut Kalen King. I'm just saying from a roster construction standpoint, these are the things that have to be considered. Probably would be a mistake to cut King, but you could see how they could easily make up for not having him too. And honestly, Bullard in the slot with Williams at safety next to X, it might be the future of the defense anyway. I wouldn't be shocked at all if Bullard is a superior slot to Nixon. So it could be a fun one. It's just that might be the future. And then number 10, last one, coaching. Look, just assess the individuals and move on. Don't let this linger over the young team. Don't let this be like a multi-day thing, a harping point, right? Like, yeah. Scold them. Stick their face in it, whatever you want to do. Whatever. I don't care. Do it for a couple days and move on. Get ready for Baltimore. Play your starters a little bit. And then get ready for the season. Practice tomorrow is at 2:30 in the afternoon Central Time. So obviously going to be a butch later for the live. I would anticipate going live around like 4:30, maybe 5. But either way, I will be there for you to tell you everything that happened at this rare afternoon practice for the Green Bay Packers. And then Thursday, we're back to our regular time at 10:30, but it is expected to be a longer practice since it's a joint practice with the Baltimore Ravens. Thanks so much, everybody. Do hope you're having a fantastic day. And as always, go Pack Go.